Chapter 16. Mephistopheles. The technicians in one of the towers instructed the arrival of the aircraft onto the castle rooftop. After touchdown, they commenced remote camouflage procedures using a computer. The same reddy brown colour to the desktop icons were converted to the aircraft itself, enabling it to blend in with the soil on the rooftop before lowering from sight. The passengers would all be met personally by no less than Count Fernandez himself. The plane's passengers now inside the castle, technicians initiated structural alterations to the rooftop. The original roof divided into 4 equal sections and came to rest like a DIY flat pack. The surface of the rooftop began to shift, rising some 20 feet into the air, supported on stilts, while internal machinery pushed upwards an amphitheatre around the length of a large pit. Torils came into sight at intervals. Soon the arena was flooded with sand. A local man arrived to rake it over evenly. After several minutes, a booming tone prompted the sand shifter to stop what he was doing, bow, and swiftly depart through a side archway. An ornately dressed bugler arrived and placed a bugle to his lips, on which he blew deeply. The seats in the amphitheatre began to fill up with an assortment of important, ruthless-looking individuals. No two looked to be from the same country of origin. They had come here, at the Count's request, in their Armani suits, with their carefully worded agendas and their deadly intent for the world, to take their seats in the amphitheatre as senators. Last, but by no means least, was Count Fernandez himself. Dressed in a silk bronze suit, he strode with impeccable precision to the ancient Roman throne seat, which bore a logo of a spider's web encapsulating the globe. He sat down, half his face cast in shadow, even in sunlight. Descended from a long line of conquistadors, Count Fernandez felt the world needed some fire in its belly, some earth in its spine. There was too much communication and not enough action. A gifted surrealist painter, the young Count spent a night in a cell with Dali himself. Some of his paintings were called dangerous, but the symmetry of surrealism allowed for many interpretations. All the while, he maintained a dignified silence, believing the old edict that as soon as the artist begins to explain his art, he no longer remains the artist. Explanation was better left to the critic's poncho for analysis. The Count had no such desire to unravel and dissect the mystique, should such a thing even be possible. The young Fernandez courted a royal princess, whose subsequent rejection was attributed to setting him out on a career as a master criminal. 20 years ago, Count Fernandez embarked upon a series of increasingly high-risk capers, dubbed the classic crimes of the century. They started innocuously enough. For one birthday, Count Fernandez scaled Big Ben and altered the time on its clock. On another, he kidnapped a famous Hollywood actress in a pact to secure alimony payments from her ex-husbands. The classic crimes became increasingly ambitious, each successive stunt bigger and more colourful and daring than the one before. In keeping with the Count's personality, he constantly struggled to outdo all his previous efforts. They included a mass counterfeiting operation, causing thousands of bogus notes to circulate Europe for months. However, the Count's last classic crime had not gone down well. The biggest, and to date last, was an attempt to replace scaffold by scaffold the Eiffel Tower for an eccentric Texan oil billionaire, Peckinpah Poole, who had wild plans to use it as a drill in the Gobi Desert. The operation used an infiltrated workforce on night shifts over a target 4-year period. Notwithstanding a brilliant self-defence in the witness box, which did much to bolster the Count's public profile, he, wife Catherine and others were convicted on Poole's microtaped evidence. Count Fernandez long suspected CIA involvement. Incarcerated within a specially reinforced maximum security wing of the Bastille prison, only an intense will saw Fernandez through each day without wavering. 5 years later, new evidence focusing on the failures of police procedure saw him unexpectedly and very publicly released. Despite Fernandez penning a string of international bestsellers on the classic crimes while imprisoned, and written in the first person no less, there just wasn't the further evidence to link him to any of them. His reputation instilled a mixture of loyalty and fear throughout his circle. Besides, it would have been nigh on impossible to sift through the complex tapestry of fiction and non-fiction deliberately interwoven throughout the books. Plans for a retrial failed, and the prosecution admission that the author had inserted deliberate errors as to the crime scene events was publicly derided, not least by the man himself. In TV interviews, Count Fernandez claimed he had started writing to ease the boredom of jail and did not see why he should not capitalise from it. As such, he became something of a folk hero. From the day of his release, Count Fernandez developed the safeguard of the top league master criminal. He became a charitable philanthropist, managing to hold on to and use his title, not least through this indefinable public sympathy, for the annual Fernandez Matador Championships. Simultaneously, and with the left arm not knowing what the right is doing, Count Fernandez methodically set about cultivating the foundations of a new criminal network, something he had been pondering during his years of incarceration. A bureau with worldwide influences, impervious to any one chink in its armour, an agenda right out of the stratosphere of past events, the biggest classic crime ever. Over time, Count Fernandez created N.E.T. Just as Western intelligence agencies recruited Nazis in 1945 and Russians in 1990, the war on terror had promoted unity of purpose among extremists, particularly when sights were expanded to Iraq. Elsewhere, N.E.T. gave disenfranchised or mercenary soldiers of state their cause back. Most of these were never seen inside N.E.T. headquarters. Even many with past links to Count Fernandez had no idea such a bureau existed, though their assistants could supply a legally provable contribution. On top of the castle rooftop, the Count was joined by Erotica. She was Greek and his long-term but not monogamous partner. In her 30s, dark red hair and lips, voluptuous in body and mind, with a cruel, vicious temper to match his own. The combination added, the Count reflected with a wry grin, the fire in his belly, the earth in his spine. Marriage, which Erotica yearned, was never a suitable topic for conversation. There were mistresses before, there would be mistresses again once she had reached a certain age, or he drew a line under some act of temper. That was the way the Count usually handled it. Then he would go out into the wilderness and find himself another snake charmer. Snakes were Erotica's speciality, and she had learned how to turn a circus novelty act into a method of interrogation, fear and torture. It also required an ongoing supply of snakes. He recalled how her favourite pet snake, Lucifer, once embedded itself down a man's throat. How, as the victim had choked on the snake had choked on the man's vomit. Erotica was inconsolable for Lucifer. Her affair with Count Fernandez had begun from there. She now sat to one side behind him. The cultural representatives, senators, immediately stopped their chatter and presented themselves earnestly. More earnestly than they would have liked. There was no need for the Count to pick up the gavel, and one or two felt his attitude was more the old school, yet his son, Lorenzo Fernandez, sat on the father's right. He was a stunningly handsome version of the Count, in his 20s, still with something of the bright young thing about him. He wore tight clothing and enjoyed the lifestyle of a playboy. Count Fernandez was confident his son would acquire the necessary gravitas to run a criminal empire. Already there were signs of alertness and maturity in Lorenzo, the unyielding eye contact, superiority as well as confidence, the purse of the lips beguiling a sneer, and the more manly way he held himself. Overall, an apprentice count. Seated at the head of the amphitheatre, Count Fernandez, his son, and the mistress took on the air of Greek gods. And now, Count Fernandez spoke in a deep, rich voice that was together strict and charismatic. To this month's review. He pressed the control on the stone armrest of his throne. A computer screen with the N.E.T logo as screensaver and keyboard emerged. N.E.T operations divided into 3 clearly defined stages: conception, gestation, birth. This was the result of a study ordered not by some focus group, team leader, special policy advisor, a damage limitation spin doctor, or bean counting company executive, but by Count Fernandez himself to cut down on bureaucracy. In fact, the focus group, team leader, special policy advisor, spin doctor, and executive will be security risks to an organisation such as N.E.T, each and every one of them. He believed in running a tight ship. They would be ballast. The concept of any new operation was determined by world outlook. Original ideas could be presented by anyone via one of the senators with access to either N.E.T headquarters or Mephistopheles. From there, operations were planned in terms of feasibility, acquiring further layers of meticulous planning. This would be between just 2 people: the senator, whoever he or she was, and the count. The issue of funding, co or sole, was then decided. A cell of agents would conduct the operation under specific guidance from N.E.T handlers, oblivious to their ultimate paymasters. Weapons from the former Anglo freedom fighting movement. Count Fernandez chose his words carefully, as the Irish representative, an attractive dyed blonde who could charm Kalashnikovs from a Russian general, smiled in his direction. Now in the hands of the beleaguered independent state of Slovakia. At this, a Slavonic gentleman with waxen hair stood proudly. Although Russian bandits have overridden our country, we have declared ourselves a resistance unit. Fiscal details of any operation were only divulged on a one-to-one basis. Projects in preparation, said the Count. The hijacking of the American tennis champion Kurt Gantry in Las Vegas. My latest contribution, which may prove the first of many such celebrity kidnaps. He returned to the computer screen. Development fee on plans to flood Eurochannel, including remuneration of our insider operatives. One of the senators, an anglicised Oriental called Lynn, of nervous disposition and medium height in a crumpled white suit, looked ill at ease at the mention of insider operatives. Counter-insurgency against the West in the Middle East, announced Count Fernandez, the representative from Eastern Crusaders. An Arabian gentleman with a large thick moustache in traditional flowing robes acknowledged Fernandez stiffly. 2 suicide bombers entered the local McDonald's, as frequented by off-duty Western personnel. Then the Count again. A plot to ram the American embassy in Kazakhstan with weapons-grade plutonium was foiled by enemy eavesdroppers. The Arabian senator intervened. They did not find the plutonium in the first place. Perhaps our organisation can put you in touch with someone who can, said Count Fernandez. The raucous laughter between the two would improve the prospect of having access to the ultimate wet dream of any self-respecting master criminal: weapons of mass destruction. Erotica once warned the Count to be careful. There is a world of difference between threatening to get what you want and a religious fundamentalist who will do what he wants. Do we really want to preside over a dead world? He was stung by a criticism and hit back with, "So long as I am presiding over something." Count Fernandez was truly proud of the scope of his criminal organisation. There was not one corner of the world, not one major extremist unit that did not contain one cultural attaché. In cases where their dual presence would be counterproductive, he was careful which combination of senators he invited to any one review. The Count spoke louder. Intelligence recruitment among MI5 and the CIA as normal. Information requested on a new British-based agency, Tightrope. The English, Irish and American senators looked to each other for explanation. I have it on very good authority that Tightrope does exist. The tone in Count Fernandez's voice almost goaded. Not that he felt let down by their efforts. Tightrope was obviously intended to be a top security bureau. He turned to Erotica, who produced a pair of binoculars. Checkered binoculars, with green edging. "Obtained from our agent," she said. "What is the mandate of this organisation?" inquired the American senator. "Of that we are still determining," replied the Count. "We cannot use tracers on our agents. If we did, our information pipeline would be closed." He leant forwards. "Finally, I regret to inform you that the security of our cabal has been compromised from within." Count Fernandez monitored the startled, stunned expressions of the senators with the binoculars. "We have a traitor in our camp, a spy in our midst." The binoculars stopped on one set of eyes. These eyes registered fear. Count Fernandez knew that look well. So did Erotica. So now did his son. A tasty morsel for the bull. As Lynn scrabbled inside a jacket pocket, the Count tapped a button on the armrest of his throne. Lynn's seat upended sharply, haplessly rolling its screaming occupant into the sandy pit that lay at the bottom of the amphitheatre. Count Fernandez signalled for the bugler, who immediately yanked the instrument to his lips. Lynn rose groggily to his feet, winded. He took stock of his surroundings. Count Fernandez modulated a control, and the pit began to descend from the seating further. The resulting hill of sand thwarted Lynn's attempts to run up it. His face contorted while his hands clung to thin air. Behind the torrel, Lynn could see something black and heavy. In a far corner, the bugler blew his horn, which neatly gave way to Lonely Bull, Herb Albert and the Tiguana Brass. Count Fernandez had not only transformed the top of El Mephistopheles castle into an amphitheatre, he had now transformed part of it into a bullring. Lynn saw the trumpeter make to go and tried to stop him, but was thrown back dismissively on the sand. Count Fernandez settled back in his throne, a sardonic sneer on his face. He raised his right hand and turned the thumb downwards. The torrel lifted sonorously. The impatient beast viewed its prey and delved hooves in the sand of the newly coined bullring. In a state of hyper-anxiety, Lynn backed away, looking around, facing a 20-foot-high wall volume of sand. There was a foothold of sorts, away from Count Fernandez and the senators. The bull began to trot towards him. Those senators who did not look away half stood and peered down into the pit with morbid curiosity. Lynn frantically tore off his crumpled white jacket and held it out to the bull, whose horns singled it out for special attention. It angrily tossed it into the air, and Lynn noticed that the inside lining of the jacket was red. The bull reached the far end of the ring and snorted furiously. Before Lynn could overcome nerves with strategy, the bull returned to catch him a glancing blow on his side. Lynn rolled over and up, anxiously ready for the next attack, like a puppet. The romantic nature of the music weirdly offset the drama. "Novellero!" shouted Count Fernandez. "Espartanio," laughed Lorenzo, referring to an amateur who jumps into a ring to cape a bull illegally. Lynn was already sinking desperate feet up the wall of sand, hoping against hope, finding then losing footholds, slipping and sliding. Count Fernandez reactivated the flow of sand through the torrents. The increasing depth of it slowed down Lynn's tearful progress. Fortunately, Lynn was just out of range as the bull returned, eyes glaring angrily. It appeared to give up, kicking up hooves and ambling sulkily away. Lynn turned back to face the sand, to be met by the well-polished heel of Lorenzo Fernandez. A swift uppercut sent him sprawling back downwards. He landed awkwardly. Wincing at the sudden pain in his hip, his eyes were drawn warily to the location and posture of the bull. It began a further mad dash run towards him. Trying not to think about what possible fate lay for him in the amphitheatre, Lynn made for a different stretch, away from any possible intervention. In so doing, one of the bull's horns made contact with his leg. Blood bled into the sand. Lynn winced in agony, but this time his progress was rapid. Almost on a par with the Count sitting opposite, Lynn brought out a silver minigun. "We must observe the reglamento at all times," said Count Fernandez. He produced with a great squish a picador's lance and flicked the top off. Lynn caught the gleam of the lance before it was thrown, and he was catapulted back into the oncoming path of the bull's horns. His overcast face screamed in terror. The bull tossed Lynn into the air. "Canardo!" shouted Lorenzo triumphantly, jolting upwards from his chair, fist clenched, almost living the events on the bull ring vicariously, as if he himself were the bull, or the bull an extension of himself. Count Fernandez piped music and sound effects from a genuine bullfight and bowed to the senators. He noted with some satisfaction the looks of horror on some of their faces, averting their gaze from the sight of the mauling. Perhaps they were trying to persuade themselves that the screams from the bull ring were simply the product of their imagination. Volterita. The bull gored Lynn. This session is now closed. The bull and its slain prey were coached away by costumed ring servants known as the Monsabios. Some of the senators were oddly content in the knowledge that their participation with this organisation was in safe hands. It is doubtful the overseer would have felt the same, had she been aware that her infiltrator lay dead, bludgeoned to death by an animal in the most barbaric means imaginable. Count Fernandez rose to deliver the mantra that had become customary to end these secret rendezvous. Deliberately misquoting Sir Francis of Assisi, he laid out the cornerstones of N.E.T's policy thus: "Where there is hope, let there be fear. Where there is credit, let there be debt. Where there is harmony, let there be discord. Where there is tightrope." He produced a white pawn chess piece, which he held aloft. A tiny tracker was visible on the base. "Let there be N.E.T." The Count snapped the white pawn in two.